Hey guys, and welcome back to Just Ask Jason. Today we are talking about context and why it's important. But before we actually get into the Devo, I have a little bit of a game for you. There's a famous scene at the beginning. It's actually Act 1, Scene 1 of Romeo and Juliet. And one of the lines said in there is, "Do you bite your thumb at me, sir?" Now, I don't know if any of you guys remember this from like high school English, but it's this really weird scene where like these two families that don't like each other have some servants walking by each other on the street, and one of the guys is like, "Hey, yo, I'm gonna start a fight with him," and then he like bites his thumb and like does that, right? And it's like, what on earth does that mean? Chances are, when you were in English class, you read that or saw it in a movie or saw it in a live play or however you were exposed to that, and you went, "What?" And what's even weirder is then they get mad at each other and they like start a fight. And what on earth? Why do they care someone's biting their thumb? Because the only time anyone in our context, in our cultures, bites their thumb is if they're a toddler sucking their thumb, or if there's somebody who's really confused and they're thinking. Right? That's it. So why on earth are all these people so angry about an adult man biting his thumb? And the answer is, as your English teacher probably told you, in the 1590s, when Romeo and Juliet was written, biting your thumb was the equivalent of flipping someone the bird. So this person, by saying, "Hey, I'm going to bite my thumb at these people and make them really, really mad, and then they're going to attack us, and then we'll have an excuse to kill them," which is the whole point of the scene. When he bites his thumb, he's flipping them the bird. And chances are the last time someone flipped you off, you were probably a little perturbed over it, right? So now the scene makes a lot more sense because we have context. Here's my question for you. If we need context to read a play or to see a play like Romeo and Juliet that was only written about 400 years ago, why would we ever read the Bible without context when the Bible was written between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago? There is a rule in biblical interpretation, and that rule is context is king. If you do not understand the context of a biblical passage, you can never fully understand what the biblical passage means. Let me give you some examples. In the book of Joshua, if you read the book without context and you don't understand the culture and you don't understand the way that they talk, much like reading Romeo and Juliet without knowing what biting your thumb means or why these families would dislike each other so much anyways, if you read the book of Joshua, it seems to be a book about genocide. And moreover, it seems to be a book that lies to you a lot because most of these people that it supposedly says are utterly destroyed actually show up again later in the Old Testament anyway. So were they destroyed or were they not? It looks like the book of Joshua is lying if you don't have context. Here's another one that's maybe a little more applicable to us. In 1 Timothy 2, Paul says in part that women should not speak in church. Period. Not even just from stage or preaching or anything like that. He just says women shouldn't talk. Without context, without understanding not only the cultural context that Paul was writing to, but also without understanding what Paul wrote about women in ministry in other passages, we are in serious danger of saying something horrific and misogynistic like women should never open their mouths in church, which is just not what Paul intended. So can you and I understand the Bible without any prior knowledge? And the answer is kind of. It depends on what you mean by understand. Reading the Bible, even if you have no prior knowledge, is still valuable. I would term this devotional reading. It's when you read the Bible, and your question isn't like, I'm going to discover historical facts or establish doctrine. You're just reading the Bible and asking, what is God saying to me today? What is he encouraging me with? What is he reminding me of when I read a particular passage? You're reading this book, well, devotional. You're reading the Bible so that God can speak into your life. Not to discover facts, but just so that God can speak into your life. That is devotional reading, and it requires very little or possibly no prior knowledge about Scripture. The other type of reading, the type of reading I'm more focused on today, is interpretation. And this is something that every believer should do. It's not just for elders. It's not just for the pastors. It's not just for small group leaders. It's for every Christian, but it does require more work. Devotional reading requires very little knowledge, but it becomes deeper the more that you know. You can discover more, you can receive more from the text when you know more about it. But interpretation requires research. It requires some amount of training. It requires some amount of discipline, and it requires time. This is what pastors are paid to do. We're paid to do a lot of things, but one of the many things that we're paid to do is to interpret Scripture because it requires training and time. I spent 4 years at college learning in part how to do this and how to do administrative stuff and counseling and other things like that. But a big focus of my training was on interpreting Scripture and then giving that interpretation to other people. So, of course, it requires training, but it's still accessible. Now, before we get to that, let's talk about some examples of devotional versus interpretive readings. Devotional readings, we'll just revisit the same text we just mentioned before. If you read the book of Joshua, yes, there are many questions about, like, is this genocide, and why do the people that are supposedly destroyed show up again later? But even with no knowledge, you can read the book of Joshua and conclude, Yahweh is a powerful God, and I want to be on his side. That's not a great historical fact. You're not making some new doctrinal discovery. All you're doing is you're reading this and going, wow, in Joshua, Yahweh is really strong. He doesn't put up with nonsense. I would really prefer to be on his team rather than fighting against him. That's a devotional reading. It requires no prior knowledge. You just read the text and go, wow, Yahweh's kind of a tough guy, and decide you want to be on his side. That's devotional reading. Reading 1 Timothy 2, 11 through 12, but all the verses around it, we get this idea that it's very important to Paul, and by extension, very important to Jesus, that people in the church service behave appropriately, that they don't speak out of turn, that they don't draw attention to themselves that is undue or unhelpful, that they don't make an unpleasant environment for other people to learn in. That's fairly apparent from the text. Now we have questions about, like, why is he singling out women, and why is he seen to be so harsh? And those are things that we can answer with interpretation. But just reading the text with no knowledge, we see the way we behave in service is very important. That is a devotional reading, and it requires no knowledge to get there. Now, of course, these texts have interpretive things that require a little more research, a little more understanding to get to, and that's where, well, research and resources come in to play. The conquest narrative in the book of Joshua, if we study the type of literature that it is, then we come to realize, as I did in a Devo a couple weeks ago, Is God a Moral Monster? It's a 2-part Devo. You should go check that out. But Joshua is a war text, and when he says he utterly destroyed the people, well, that's actually not to be taken literally. It's just the way that they wrote this kind of history back in the day. The Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah did the exact same thing when he wrote about the victories that he had over the Canaanites and the Israelites in some of his military campaigns. So if we read the book of Joshua with context, understanding what the writer of Joshua is trying to say, it's pretty easy for us to conclude that no, the book of Joshua is not talking about genocide. And actually, a careful reading of Joshua shows us that Joshua never claims to have taken all the land anyways. He just took parts of it. He was as faithful as he could be. He did everything God had asked of him, but he didn't finish the conquest. That was left for later generations to figure out. Women talking, or rather not talking, in 1 Timothy 2:11 with context, we can begin to understand that Paul is writing to a specific city, to a specific pastor whose name is Timothy. That's where the name of the book comes from. And he's giving Timothy advice as pastor of this congregation in the city of Ephesus to not allow women to speak because they were being disruptive. In fact, it's obvious that Paul did expect women to speak in various contexts in the church for 2 reasons. First of all, because in 1 Corinthians, he talks about women praying in the public assembly, praying in church service. And praying is a type of speaking. When you're up in front of people praying aloud with them, that is a form of speaking. And Paul explicitly gives rules about, like, how to dress and how to behave when you're doing that sort of thing, which is also very culturally bound. But the point is, he expected women to speak in Corinth. Moreover, when he sends the letter that we call the book of Romans to the church in Rome, the person who carried it, and from what we know about ancient letter carriers, would have been the one to recite and explain it as well. In other words, the first preacher of the book of Romans, he sends it with a woman. The woman's name was Phoebe. The first preacher of the book of Romans was a woman. So clearly, Paul expected women to speak in church in at least some context. So we shouldn't read 1 Timothy 2 without context and conclude something horrible and misogynistic like women shouldn't speak in church. That's not what Paul's saying. Paul is giving advice to a church that is having trouble either with uneducated women or with women who used to be prophetesses of Artemis. Again, context of the city of Ephesus makes all these things more clear, but the point is this. If you read certain passages and try to draw doctrinal conclusions with no context, you're going to end up in some really dangerous territory. But with context, these things start making a lot more sense. So what can I do, or you do, to interpret better? My primary piece of advice, if you have the time and money, is to take a class on biblical interpretation at a Bible college. So my alma mater, Central Christian College of the Bible, has one called Introduction to Biblical Literature. That's our basic interpretation class. It's available to pretty much anyone. They offer it online, so I'd say if you have the time and you have the money, call CCCB, my alma mater, and ask them about taking a course online in Introduction to Biblical Literature. But not everyone has the time and the money for that. I understand that, so here's some other things you can do. Fill your podcast or sermon rotation with good teachers. I try my best to give you guys context when I preach and do these devos and things, so selfishly, I will recommend my own teachings. But in addition to me, I would also recommend the Pillar podcast from Pillar Seminary. There's actually 2 Pillar podcasts. One of them is Catholic, and the other one's from a school called Pillar Seminary. I'm talking about the second one. I know nothing about the Catholic one. I just don't know. I've never listened to them. I just know they exist. Pillar podcast from Pillar Seminary. It's a terrific one. They're great at giving context, especially for the Old Testament. Another resource is Tim Mackey. I recommend him all the time. He's an amazing teacher. He works at the group called The Bible Project. So Bible Project videos, they're written for just like everyday people to understand, super understandable, super informative. They'll teach you a lot about interpreting and understanding the Bible. So highly recommend. That resource is free. Just go to YouTube, look up The Bible Project. In addition to those, N.T. Wright is a terrific, also known as Tom Wright. But N.T. Wright, he is a British Anglican preacher. He's a very well-known New Testament expert. He has a lot of free resources online. He has, if you're willing to pay some money, he has some amazing books and paid courses and things like that you can look into as well. But definitely check out his free stuff. In addition to that, read good books about the Bible from good authors. Kenneth E. Bailey, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes. The IVP Bible Background Commentary edited by Craig Keener. This is a terrific book as well. The Chronological Life of Christ by Mark Moore. All books that I would recommend. Anything by Ben Witherington III. But you know what? If you're looking to buy some books about the Bible, give the church a call or drop a comment on this video and just say, hey, I want a book about blank. About a certain book of the Bible or a certain topic, and I will get back to you and I'll give you any recommendations that I can. But my biggest piece of advice for you that is attainable for everyone and costs you nothing but your time is go to church. Just go to church. Because most pastors, not all, but most pastors are trained in this kind of thing. So just by going to church and listening to sermons and spending time around these religious leaders, around Christian pastors, you'll learn how to interpret the Bible because they're teaching you. In addition to that, do small groups, especially if there's a small group being taught by your pastor that your pastor's a part of. Like, definitely go for that. Or your elders, because elders tend to be very biblically literate. That's why they're elders. So try to get yourself around people who know the Bible. Here at our church, we're very lucky to actually have several people that have attended Bible college for various amounts of time. So man, spend some time around them. If you go to Brian, me, my wife Maggie, also Abby Asher, and Mitch Ward have all spent time at Bible colleges. So spend time around us. Talk to us. Ask us about Bible things. We won't know all the answers, but gosh, we can help you guys out. Go to church, be a part of a small group, and when all else fails, call your pastor if you have a question. My favorite part of my job is answering people's questions about the Bible. So if I got 90 questions a week where people were just asking me things about the Bible and asking for book recommendations and asking for, like, I would be so happy. I would blow off all my other responsibilities to answer those questions because that is the most fun part of my job. So please ask your pastor. 95% of you have a pastor that would be overjoyed if you just called them one day and said, hey, I was reading this passage in Mark and I don't know what it means. They would probably pass out because they're so shocked. But once they recovered, they'd be like, man, this is amazing. I just want to talk to you about the Bible for a while. Can we go get coffee? Can we stay on the phone for a minute? Like, ask your pastor. He or she will be very, very excited to hear from you. Whether that's your lead pastor, associate pastor, youth pastor, whatever. They'll be excited. Just ask. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. Context is important, so let's educate ourselves. Let's be smart in our faith. Let's, in Peter's words, learn to give a defense for the hope that we have. As always, we're praying for you. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, that sort of thing. It helps get our message out there so more people can see it. Make the YouTube algorithm happy, and more people will see our message. But we're praying for you. We love you, and we hope to see you this Sunday. Bye.